Why the people who love you hate to see you succeed. We're going to really take a look at this because I think a lot of people have had this experience when they start to grow, when they deliberately, intentionally set themselves up for evolution and growth, spiritually or otherwise. And sometimes we see these people who supposedly love us, maybe it's family members, maybe it's friends, whoever else it is. It seems they're almost against our growth. It seems they're almost trying to prevent it in one way or another. So why is this? In this video, I want to discuss this and also go over some things you can do in the face of this, because I've gone through this. I know it can be very, very difficult, and I want to give you some tools that you can use, some things to think about that can help you if this situation is occurring in your life. So that's coming up next. Hi there, welcome to the channel. If you are new here, this is HeartSpace. My name is Dave, and the mission that I have with this channel is to really help those who have discovered there is more to themselves and to life, to really unearth and step into their true co-creative power so they can start following their heart path more and more and more. And that's what we do here on this channel. That's what this video is about, and that's what I try and create every video about, to help. And also, if you really want to start moving down that heart path and experience real transformation, check out the course I just launched called Heart Path, funnily enough. You can check out more information about that in the description below. We're cultivating a very heart-centered, very just great community over there on Heart Path, and I would love to have you be a part of that. Now, in this video, we're going over, like I mentioned, why is it seems that people who love us, a lot of times this can be family members or others, why does it seem they don't want us to succeed? Why does it seem that they're almost, as we start to rise, trying to pull us back down away from that level of growth? Because this was something I was very curious about when I started going through my own journey of self-development. I was just so curious to why it seemed people who were supposed to care about me, were supposed to love me, or whatever else, it seemed they were almost trying to sabotage me. It seemed they were almost trying to discourage me from growing, whether it was just using negative speak, saying things like, well, you can't do that, that's impossible, you're not cut out for this, whatever else it is, or that's crazy, you should do this, do the safe thing, whatever else it is, to whether it was downright, malicious. Now, that didn't happen too often, but ultimately this happens to a lot of people in one way or another, where the people they thought cared for them and loved them, and it's not to say that they don't, but in one way or another seem to be trying to prevent them from succeeding. So let's go over the more innocuous one. Let's go over the one that's probably a lot more innocent and say family members. Now, sometimes this isn't innocent. There are many people who have, a lot of conflict with family members. And ultimately, in my eyes, a lot of people will actually stay in abusive relationships with family members. Maybe it's they don't get along with their mom, their dad, or whatever else, and they're very toxic for them. But because they're labeled as family, they'll put up with it or whatever else it is. And I don't agree with that, and that's something we can talk about, maybe later in this video, or I might do another video on it. But there's sometimes also a level of innocence. And you have to understand that someone that's attached to you in the way that a parent is, whether it's a mother, a father, or someone else in your family, a lot of times it's very scary for them to see you change, because it means that their relationship to you will change. It means that the box they've kind of pigeonholed you into, whether consciously or unconsciously, is going to shift, because you are shifting. If you think about it like this is you, and you're kind of in this container, and that's the way someone sees you, let's say a parent sees you, but then you start expanding or just completely step out of that into something new, a lot of people don't know what to do with you at that point, how to relate to you. Maybe there was a certain way they showed you love that you no longer respond to, or maybe there's a way they got love from you that you've grown past, or something of that nature. So understand, to a lot of people, sometimes they do this unconsciously because they're scared of losing the connection and relationship that they currently have with you. And I found this to be the case mainly when it comes to those family ties, because again, this is a much more innocent one. It usually is done unconsciously. It's not like a deliberate attempt to sabotage your growth or whatever else it is. It's just different levels of evolution and consciousness. And one thing you have to understand is, if we look at the Hawking's scale of consciousness, that there are different levels to this. And so if you have a parent or someone who loves you, who is at a different level of consciousness, and you're rising up that consciousness scale to where your default is, say, in these levels of love and peace, and I mean, that'd be really amazing. Yeah, love and peace and kindness and all this stuff, but they're maybe down here more in fear or pride or something else. it's going to be very hard for them to relate to you. And because you're not going to be willing to come down here to connect to them on that fear level or to connect to them on that pride level, it can be very scary for them because their only option at that point is maybe to also rise up. And it's funny, a lot of times when people are given that permission to rise up or stay the same, a lot of people get too scared to rise up. And so a lot of people will try and bring someone back down. Again, sometimes this is done very innocently. That doesn't mean that you should just allow it to happen, but it's done not intentionally. Other times it can be more malicious, and when that's the case, if say someone, like this happens sometimes in friendship, let's say you're growing and there's a friend who's used to you being down here with them kind of in a certain consciousness level, maybe they complain all the time and you just don't want to do that anymore, you're in this level where you don't want to complain, and they're like, oh no, I don't want to come up here, I want you back down here. You might find someone deliberately, intentionally being like, I got to get that guy back down here, it's lonely down here, whatever else it is. And in that case, I do believe that's someone you should probably cut out if that kind of thing continues. That's toxic behavior and not something that I personally permit, someone deliberately, intentionally trying to tear me down or lower my level of consciousness, even though they wouldn't define it as that, but just someone who's trying to drag you down, so to speak. And again, not in some kind of innocent type of way. I think there's ways we can work with that, set boundaries around that, but work with that. Because again, when we think of levels of consciousness, think about it like a kindergartner versus a fifth grader. A fifth grader is going to ultimately have more experience and know more than the kindergartner, at least in this example. But the kindergartner might be doing certain things that it's not aware, I don't want to say good or bad, but are doing certain things it just doesn't know yet. It doesn't have that level of awareness. And so if you're at this fifth grade level with that level of awareness, it's hard for the kindergartner to, all at once get up to that point. That's not where they're at in their growth. And for us, a lot of people, even if they're older chronologically, does not mean they're older spiritually, growth-wise, or evolutionarily from a spiritual level. There are people who can be very young, in their teenage or 20s that are very developed spiritually, and people who are in their 60s, 70s, or 80s who have no spiritual development whatsoever. Time, chronologically, does not equate to spiritual growth. It can, or levels of consciousness rising, it can. But if you're doing the same thing for 40, 50, 60 years straight, usually it means you're conditioned into that, and it becomes even harder to recondition yourself after that point. So understand this has nothing to do with age, because we like to look at it like, oh, if someone's 20-something or 30-something, they should listen to the person who's 50, 60, 70 because they have more experience. But what if that more experience has been living in fear for 60 years? That's not personally the kind of experience I want to learn from. So a bit of a tangent, but ultimately with people like your family and everyone else, if they're not being malicious and you don't sense it's very intentional, just understand and have empathy to a degree about where their level of consciousness is. Now, it would be great if we could pull every single person up who is at a lower level of consciousness, but ultimately it's not our job, nor should we be able to enforce or force our worldview on someone else, or what it is we believe on someone else. Like, oh, I'm in this love energy all the time, it's amazing, I'm gonna bring you up. But instead of doing that, just allowing yourself to be the example through your life, through your energy. I heard someone once say that our lives is like our masterpiece. It is like our painting, our message. We are always sending messages just by the way we are living. For example, I see the way some people are living maybe in their health. Maybe it's in their spiritual life or whatever else. And I get inspired by that because through their actions, through what they're doing, through their growth, it is a message of possibility to me. It is a message of, wow, if I do these things, if I think in a similar way, if I continue growing, I can have maybe that physical reality, or maybe I will see a similar inner shift. And I've seen that in my own life as I've continued to grow in certain ways. Certain people who have been involved in my life have actually by their own volition, raise their own consciousness level. To give you one example, one thing when I realized the effectiveness of this versus trying to force someone to do something and just let go and just live my life the best I can and allow people to come up if they choose to, I found that works so much more effectively. When it's, funnily enough, like when I don't want it, when I just detach myself from it, people feel comfortable in being able to grow in their own way. And the example is I did a video such a long time ago about a thing called a flasca. And what a flasca does is it takes your water, it uses the technology and the research of Dr. Iamoto. If you've ever seen that experiment he did where he took water, froze it, and then would say different things to it or play different music to see how the water molecules would configure, essentially. And so there were these incredible patterns when, for example, love energy was pumped into the water versus fear and all this different stuff. And what the flasca does is it essentially tunes into that frequency and helps the water vibrate at a level of love and gratitude and whatever. And then I was having a call with my dad one day, and I just noticed that he had one. And I'm like, do you have a flasca there? And he's like, oh yeah, I watched your video, like this was like a month later, I watched your video, and I'm like, you know what, that sounds really good. And he looked into it himself, he looked at the research, got himself a flasca. And it was just something like that. I didn't push him to do so. I didn't, try and force it upon him, but he, through observing something I did, went out and went, this is a pretty good idea. And I've seen, certain levels of growth in other people going in a similar direction. And so that's some way we can approach this sometimes with people who are in our family or loved ones that are, again, they're not trying to bring you down deliberately, but it might just be a certain level of consciousness. So that's a way you can encourage almost growth in that area. Now, really quick before we end the video, obviously I want to talk about people who are a little more malicious with it or even doing it innocently, but it's consistently happening. Because that's, I think, the hardest one. I think when it's a family member or a friend and they're innocent enough, but they won't, they keep, still in a way trying to drag you down. Because I'm a big believer, even if you're not aware of your actions, I shouldn't have to cater to them just because maybe your level of awareness isn't at a certain place. For example, if someone's complaining all of the time and I don't want to hang out with them and they wonder why or whatever else it is, and I say that but they don't get it, it's not my job to help them understand that, if that makes sense. That's their journey. Now, if they're open to it and being like, well, can you help me understand? And they're actually, I feel they're open-hearted towards that, then maybe I will. But it's not my job to go in there and say, fix someone. It's not my job to force my worldview on someone. And it's also not, my prerogative to be around people, whether it's intentional or unintentional, whose energy is in a certain place that would ultimately drag mine down, right? And are unwilling to allow mine, let's say, to pull them up. Again, let your life be your message, the way in which you're living to be your message, which could potentially pull people up. And guess what? It will for some people, but it won't for others because they're just in a different place in their journey, which is no better than or worse than anybody else's. Again, the kindergartner is no worse or better than the fifth grader. They're just in different places. And you won't see the fifth grader typically interacting with the kindergartner that much as well, because they're in two totally different places in their journey, educationally in that example, but think of that for any kind of growth as well. Think about it in sports. If you're a beginner at a sport, you're not going to be playing with and against someone who's been playing for a decade and is playing at a very high level, right? It just wouldn't make any sense. So treat this in the same way when it comes to growth. And for me, even if it's innocent, I won't really spend too much time around people who are in that phase because it's not a congruent thing right now. It is not aligned. All right, and so that is this video, guys. Now, again, the main things to take away from this is just understanding the different consciousness levels. Again, I would look at the Hawking scale of consciousness to understand this. And when you're at one level and someone's at another, again, it's not better or worse. Just think of it like this. Let's say you're in love and someone's in fear. They literally can't relate to you because they're on a totally different frequency. It's like them being tuned into one radio station and you're on another, and you being like, oh, did you hear that song on this thing? Blah, blah, blah. Were you aware of this? Like, no, I didn't hear any of that. I didn't see any of that. What are you talking about? Right? It's exactly the same thing. If they're on this frequency of fear, this energy of fear or whatever else it is, pride or something else that's technically lower on that consciousness scale, and you're, in gratitude and love and whatever else most of the time, or that's where you want to be and you want to keep your energy there, there's just not too much congruency between those two places. In my eyes, I don't want to be around that kind of energy. Again, sometimes it's unavoidable, family, whatever else, but there are times, even with family, I won't speak to them as often if I need a little bit of a break from that energy, or if I've maybe even said something, said, hey, I'm not going to talk as much if we are going to be just complaining or whatever else it is. And that's completely your right to do. You know, I'm a big believer that you should protect your energy and really cultivate that beyond anything else, because ultimately, if my energy is at a certain place, let's say that my energy gets dragged down to the level of fear consciousness or something, then I'm going to go out in the world and interact that way. It's going to be displayed in my videos. It's going to be displayed in my work. When I work with clients, I'm now bringing that into my client calls. When I work on HeartPath, I'm now bringing that into HeartPath and everything I do. And ultimately, if I'm coming to the world with a cup that's empty, you know, I'm only going to be able to give from an empty cup. And ultimately, again, my mission is to help people discover what they truly are. So it doesn't serve me in that regard. What does serve me is to cultivate my energy, be around people who also help that, and I can help them in doing that, to do the practices and spend my time doing those practices that help lift that up, and then bring that out into the world with that filled cup, which now helps me help more people, helps me in my own life in many different ways. So anyway, that's a bit long-winded. We're going to end it here. There are a ton of mosquitoes flying around me that are biting me all over my legs, which I will need to be aware of next time I'm filming in this spot. So before I become, you know, dinner for 100 mosquitoes, I'm going to end this video. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning into this video. Remember that you are loved. Check out HeartPath down below, and I will see you in the next one.